Hello, everybody. I'm Gerri Willis. Are video games to blame for gun violence in this country? Vice President Joe Biden today continuing his week-long meetings at the White House, seeking ways to reduce gun violence in this country following last month's massacre in Newtown, Connecticut. Today, it was the video game industry's turn. In those talks were publishers of some of the most violent games out there, including, as you can see, Electronic Arts, Activision Blizzard, whose violent game Call of Duty franchise is one of the biggest money makers ever. Take a look at these pictures. This is what it's like to play one of these games, which brings the biggest money makers ever. Take a look at these pictures. This is what it's like to play one of these games, which brings me back to the question I started the show with. Are video games really to blame? Joining me now, Dr. Carol Lieberman, a psychiatrist who thinks video games are responsible for gun violence, and Travis Keller, a gaming blogger with Sentinel, who says video games are not to blame. Okay, clearly we've staked out your positions, but Travis, you say you're a video game blogger, you play video games, you say video games are not to blame. How so?
Well, you know, I've been playing video games for around 17 years. I've played a number of video games, and at the end of the day, when we talk about Sandy Hook, and when we talk about violent incidents in general, I fail to see the correlation between video games and the violence that's being portrayed here. I think in blaming video games, we're losing sight of what's really to blame, and at the end of the day, it's the people that enact these actions.
So it's the people, it's Adam Lanza who actually pulled the trigger. Dr. Lieberman, what do you say? How do you counter that? Because I know you disagree.
Yes, I mean, if you want to look at Adam Lanza, that's a perfect example. When the first reports came out about how he had shot his mother in the head and how he had shot the kids multiple times, not just once or twice, but they were riddled with bullets, I knew that he was obsessed with video games, because that we have seen time and time again when there have been shootings, when people are shot like that, like you shoot in a video game, that these are people who have been trained on video games. And that's exactly what happens. Children who aren't rewarded in other places of their life get rewarded for killing more and more on these video games.
Let's get Travis back in here. Respond to this, because there's something to the way these shootings occur. It is so similar to the way people react and interact with the games. What do you make of it, Travis?
It might be similar, but I fail to make a connection between the acts that are done in reality to virtual reality. There are a lot of similarities in video games, and violence is one of them, but I fail to make a connection between the acts that are done in reality to virtual reality. There are a lot of similarities in video games, and violence is one of them, but just because Adam Lanza did these acts, just because his actions were similar, I find it ridiculous that we're making the connection that these actions are somehow linked to a video game. At the end of the day, as far as my knowledge goes, it has not been said that he's played video games, so I fail to see how can we make that connection.
I think that actually has been some of the reporting that he did play video games. But let me ask a different question here, and I'll go to you, Dr. Lieberman. You know, where's mom and dad? Where are the parents? There are actual ratings for these games, and let me show you some of these ratings. All kinds of ratings, from everything from early childhood to teen to mature to adults only. Look, you know, at the end of the day, if you want to control this, mom and dad have to get involved. What do you say to that, Carol?
Well, first of all, the rating system does not rate these games appropriately. The things that they say are okay for certain ages really should not be seen by these ages, or for anyone, for adults for that matter. And you know, what your guest is saying, I failed to see the connection. Yes, this is to see the connection. Yes, this is just like the video game industry is just like the tobacco industry from years ago when they failed to see that there was a connection between smoking cigarettes and cancer. But there have been decades and decades of studies showing that when people watch video games, play video games, the more hours they consume, the more they become aggressive. And there are even studies that show that there are physical changes in the brain concomitant with playing video games.
Travis, you got to respond to this. What do you make of those studies out there that Carol's citing?
You know, I think when you compare something like video game violence to something like tobacco industry, you're comparing apples to oranges. I think I'm living proof. I've been playing violent video games since I was 4 years old, and I've never done anything violent. And I'm sure there are millions of other players out there that have not done anything violent. As far as these studies go, I would advise everyone to take them for what they're worth, because there are millions of gamers out there that play violent video games on a daily basis. And if video games truly are to blame, I would like to believe that we would be seeing a lot more incidents similar to Sandy Hook.
Well, you know, what do they say? Money talks, right? Let's look at video game retail sales. They're down December to December to $3.21 billion. Maybe mom and dad out there started yanking the cord on paying for some of this stuff. But Carol, is this a case where it's a big industry and you can't fight back because there are so many companies involved, they're so powerful? Or is it a case of we're just ignoring the problems here?
Well, it's both. I have been fighting back to video game companies for years, and yet they become more and more powerful because it's an addiction. They hook people on these games. These people get rewarded for playing the games, and you can't stop. It's a change that happens in the body that excites you. It's like an adrenaline rush, and so people actually get addicted, just like they get addicted with nicotine. And we have to stop. Parents have to pay more attention, and the game makers have to stop making violent video games.
Travis?
Parents have to pay more attention, and the game makers have to stop making violent video games.
Travis, are you an addict? Is Carol saying that you're addicted to the rush of these games?
Yes.
Does she have it right?
No, she doesn't. I think that, again, when we're comparing video games to nicotine, you're comparing two entirely different things. Like any other player, I would wager to guess any other player out there, we don't get addicted. There's not a rush. And moreover, I think that this violent portrayal that's given to video games, it's a very bad stereotype that's given to the industry. And I think that, video games are riddled with stereotypes.
Respond to Carol's
Most of the games, that's not all of them. Not all of them are. I think
the game manufacturers push the envelope in order to get the people to buy their games, and they do that by making them more violent.
Do you agree with that, Travis?
Most of the time, though, what people fail to realize is that games do more than just show violence. Most of them tell stories, and I did a report in college showing how video games tell stories. Video games aren't these mindless apparatuses where and I did a report in college showing how video games tell stories. Video games aren't these mindless apparatuses where you're rewarded for hitting people, for shooting people. They tell stories, and more often than not, video games really don't push the envelope, because at the end of the day, most of the stuff I've seen in video games, most of the stuff I've seen and I've seen it on the news, I've seen it on television, and I've heard it in music.
Travis, I want to follow up with one thing you told one of our producers, which I thought was really interesting. You said blaming video games is a cop-out. What are we ignoring? What is the issue you think we need to pay attention to?
I think we need to look at the issues that Adam Lanza was plagued with. The reports show that he was a mentally unstable individual. So I fail to see how video games, or even other issues that are being talked about, should come into play. I feel like when we talk about video games and when we blame this incident on video game violence, we're taking away from what really matters, and that is more studies on mental illnesses, and more importantly, having more awareness about people that may show signs, so then stuff can be done.
Well, Carol, you're a psychiatrist. How do you respond to that?
Having more awareness about people that may show signs, so then stuff can be done.
Well, Carol, you're a psychiatrist. How do you respond to that?
Well, there's no question that people with certain psychological issues are more vulnerable to the impact of violent video games. Children who have been neglected and they spend lots of hours playing violent video games, or children with mental illnesses, or adults with mental illnesses. But just because that's not the only part of the story. The more hours of violent media, particularly video games, that you consume, the more you become aggressive. And even if you don't go into a school and start shooting people, you'll have more road rage, you'll have more aggression in all other aspects of your life.
All right, I think we've covered this. Just to close out here, I appreciate both of you on this topic. Interesting stuff. But I have to say, like Travis, my husband's a big video game player. Never even seen him kick a dog. So, I mean, I think it's an open question, the impact. But fascinating topic. Thanks to both of you for being on tonight. Dr. Lieberman, Travis, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, these video games are not only violent, they're big business. As we mentioned, more than $3 billion worth of games were sold last December alone. So what are the best-selling games of all time? That list makes up tonight's top 5. Number 5, We Play from 2006. The party video game has sales of more than $1 billion. While most won't consider the package game violent, look at this video, right? It's mostly games like table tennis and billiards. It does have a shooting game. And number 4, Grand Theft Auto, the 4th edition of this violent and raunchy game from 2008, grossed $1.25 billion. A huge profit, even though it cost a record $100 million to make. Think about that for a video game. Number 3, Mario Kart. The Wii version of this mega popular series was released in 2008 and sold nearly 30 million copies. It is the highest grossing Nintendo game of all time. Mom and Dad, you probably know that video. And number 2, it doesn't get much more violent than this. Call of Duty, the Black Ops version. Much more violent than this. Call of Duty, the Black Ops version took this game to a whole new level, grossing more than the first 2 versions combined. The second that it came out in November, it earned $1 billion. $1 billion, my friends, in just 2 weeks. And the number 1 best-selling video game of all times, World of Warcraft. By a landslide, analysts predict this game has generated well over $10 billion in revenue, and it is a cult favorite. It looks culty, doesn't it? A lot more still to come in this hour, including our debate on